Good day, everyone. It's Alan Schimmel, DevOps.com, and welcome to another DevOps.com webinar. Got a great webinar on a pretty hot topic today. It's called Extending Jenkins to the Mainframe, a Simpler Approach, and it's sponsored by our friends at CA Technologies. You know, the idea of DevOps and mainframes has come to the fore as we're seeing more and more mainframe-based organizations adopt a DevOps transformation or journey, and they're not leaving the mainframes behind. The idea of bimodal and all of that stuff seems to have passed over, and we're going to find out today about how to use extending Jenkins to the mainframe with some great folks who on our panel. Before we start, though, let me just quickly, for those who may not know, we use GoToWebinar control panel. We use GoToWebinar rather. Most of you have the GoToWebinar control panel in the upper right-hand side of your screen. We've set aside time for questions today. We'd love, nothing makes for a better webinar than to have some great questions from the audience. So if you look at your GoToWebinar control panel and expand the question section by making that arrow point downwards, you will see that you can go in there, you could type your question in, and you know what? You don't have to worry about forgetting it. You don't have to remember about asking it later. It's in there, we have it, and we will get it to you ASAP. So please, guys, use it and put your questions in as they pop into your mind, and we will get to them. If, on the other hand, you're having a technical issue, you can't hear the audio well, the slides aren't moving or something else, but you can still get to the chat window, we do have engineering folks standing by who will try to help resolve your issue and still let you use the webinar, or at least, you know, view and listen to the webinar. So if you have a technical issue, please put that in there. I see we have the normal first question from Chris, which is, will a recording of this webinar be available? Yes, the webinar is being recorded, and it will be available on DevOps.com and DevOps TV, our YouTube channel, usually same day or within 24 hours of today's webinar, and the slides should be available as well. Just a warning, there will be some live demos today, which is always great for a webinar. And, you know, the slides of that don't usually translate well, so you'll want to check the recording on that. But yes, Chris, there will be a recording on this. So with that out of the way, let's turn to extending Jenkins to the mainframe, a simpler approach. And let me introduce you to our all-star panel. Guys, if we can, quick disclaimer here. So, from CA Technologies, and we've got Goran's smiling face. I don't know
Hello.
if Sujay, if you're coming on quite yet, but we have Sujay Solomon, Michael Bauer, and Goran Bedjic. And if I mispronounce people's names, I do apologize. Sujay, you can hear us?
Yep, I'm here, Alan.
Great. Goran, you can hear us. You said hello already. And I guess Michael is here, but he'll be, his portion of the webinars, here he is. Hey, Michael.
Oh, yeah.
You'll be joining us. Michael will be doing some demos later on. So with that being said, Goran, I'd like to turn things over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Alan. I'll stop sharing my cam just so that I can see more of the screen. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'll give you a little bit of a context. The meat of the presentation is the demonstration, and we want to show you how this simpler approach looks like. But before we go there, I just have a couple of slides to talk about what is the problem that we are solving, that we want to also show you how we approached it and how we solved it, and what are some important considerations when you face the same problem, and some things that you need to keep in mind before we go into the demonstration. But I promise this will be brief. We're talking about extending the DevOps pipeline to mainframe. I will not go into the description of why mainframe is important. We are all here for that reason. I can just tell you from the CA Technologies perspective, we see that in the recent years, 3/4 or more of our clients are increasing capacity on mainframe. There is very much a turning point in the industry where organizations are realizing that they have to make a decision on how they want to move forward, and many are deciding to continue investing in their mainframe application and building and modernizing this environment, which is closely related to what we are discussing today. However, while this is happening, there are challenges, and the technical challenge of how to enable that modernization and is one. There is another challenge of skills required to do that, and that skills challenge is also closely related to what we're going to be talking about today. Now, when we talk about extending DevOps pipeline to the mainframe and we talk about modernization, it's important to mention all three aspects of that process. It's people. People who use the tools, developers, but everybody else involved in that factory and in the process of modernization. Then it's the development process itself and automation and tooling to enable all this. And in this overview, in this context, I want to touch on these three aspects. I have one slide on each, and then we're going to move to the demonstration of what we are here for today. So let's start with people working with mainframe, accessing data, interacting, maintaining applications, creating new value for their organizations. So meet Michelle. Michelle is a persona that we use internally when we talk about developers coming up to speed with the environment. And there's a generational shift that's happening where Michelle's being hired from the industry, coming from college. They have certain experience. People who have been immersed in DevOps on the open system side, they have certain expectations and knowledge. They like working in a cloud environment that gives them a lot of possibilities for automation and application of this automated process in a daily life. However, when they try to apply this knowledge to mainframe, there is a gap, or at least it's been there for quite a long time. And so that's the main challenge that we will be talking about today, is how can we transform that process, enable Michelle to apply tools, knowledge, frameworks, experience from the open system side and be effective in accomplishing tasks on mainframe, targeting mainframe as just another platform. So some of the challenges, certainly data is on the mainframe, but also a lot of scripts, source code, build scripts. A lot of these valuable assets are on the mainframe, and historically the only way to work with them was to learn the tools and the processes that are required on the for mainframe development that were very different. No expertise in the operating system, the interaction with it, the tools, certainly applications that have been there for a long time, lack documentation and things like that, lots of challenges there. And there's also a dependency on a lot of very specialized people with specialized skills who maintain these environments. And so Michelle has a hard time accomplishing things on her own, so she depends on a lot of people. She needs to create tickets, wait until these tickets are resolved. So how can we help? So one of the challenges that we want to address, and we want to show you where we are in this process, is how can we help Michelle to be effective and extend her skills and knowledge and the whole DevOps pipeline to mainframe. All right. So the technology that we're going to show you today, it's just been announced in June by CA, and last week we the consortium of organizations around mainframe, including IBM and Rocket Software and CA, have announced an open source initiative to help develop a new interface for interaction with mainframe. And today we are using the command line interface part of that Zoe initiative. The product in question is from CA. It's built on top of Zoe, called Brightside, and it serves as a bridge that exposes various different system and product APIs to Michelle in form of a set of commands. And so by using the command line, Michelle can now extend and can use the scripting languages that she's familiar with, tools like Jenkins, to start automating workflows on mainframe. And so that's what our Michelles today are, Sujay and Mike, and they're going to show us how they are doing that. All right, so that was people part. And I want to talk about the process and what we are doing and what we're showing you today. It's a very, very basic workflow of making a change in an existing application, running a review of those changes. I don't know exactly if every step is going to be automated in the demonstration, but this is a very, very standard set of activities that one would want to automate. We'll create a new build, provision a test environment, deploy the new build and tests, run them, create a report, and clean up. And Michelle can be the tooling set in place with Zoe serving as a bridge between her open system tools and mainframe. We'll be able to first interactively create scripts and automation for those steps, and then hand them over to Jenkins to automate these workflows and integrate into the rest of the pipeline. That's the scope of what we are showing today. This is not the whole story. There are many more layers of automation that can be added on top of that, and that some of you may have questions about or are already at that step. We have a limited amount of time. We need to start somewhere, so we're going to show you that basic workflow. And then from there, one of the things that we would certainly like to discuss more, maybe after this webinar, if you have interest, is how to respond and integrate these automations that we have created, that we are running in Jenkins, based on different events that are happening outside of the mainframe or also in the mainframe. And so in this picture, you can see different environments that can be connected, and events from these environments and tools can trigger Jenkins workflows like the one we're going to show you today. Now, there is that's a little bit more complex scenario that requires a tool with the capability to capture these events and basically forward the action to Jenkins. But that's out of scope for today's demonstration. So I just want to set that explanation. And then even beyond that, as we start looking into going into continuous delivery and deployment, there are many more automation and more needs that are out of scope of today's presentation. So we are starting with very basic use case in mind. And then just as a reference, and after that we are switching to demo, I also want to introduce a CA portfolio for mainframe DevOps. So today we are using the bridge between the open system and mainframe to provide this automation, and we use Jenkins. At the top of this diagram, you can see various different tools organized according to different phases of a typical development cycle that maybe you're not familiar with. And then towards the bottom, you see two initiatives that are aiming towards simplifying and enabling more developers to be effective and efficient working with mainframe. The first one was Eclipse, that made a significant improvement in terms of helping with interactive workflows. but it really didn't crack that automation part. And what we're going to be using today and showing you today is that Zoe initiative and Product CA Brightside that bridges the two worlds and enables Michelle to write automation scripts that live on her laptop and that interact with Mainframe just as with any other platform. So, having said that, let's switch to Sujay, who is going to show you some of the work that he and the team have been doing to enable automation on Mainframe.
Thanks, Goran. If you could just pass me control.
Yep. I am going to do that in a moment. Okay, you're the presenter now.
Okay. Just to confirm, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. All right, so thank you, Goran. I'm gonna get started by just, since the topic we've got for today is Jenkins integration with Mainframe, I'm gonna show you guys just a little bit of a preview of what the end result will be, but I'm gonna rewind back after this and start from kind of the basics. Now, we have a very simple basic pipeline here. This is, in my case, I've got Jenkins, and you might notice that it looks prettier than usual just because I have a Blue Ocean plugin installed in Jenkins that makes things look like this. And I'm also using the Jenkins Pipeline functionality. So in this case, we just have a very simple two-step pipeline. In the first step, we're just setting up some mainframe credentials for the Brightside command line interface, which drives a lot of the scripts that perform automated actions on the mainframe. So the first step is just setting up those credentials from Jenkins. And the second step is actually to perform the automated actions, in our case, from a shell script. Now, as Goran mentioned earlier, you're able to use different orchestration tools or your choice of scripting languages that you would want to automate these things in. But just for simplicity's sake today, I've kind of stuck to shell scripts just for simplicity. Now, to go back, instead of digging deep into the pipeline directly, what I'm going to do is, since a lot of our automation is CLI and scripting based, just like how you would do it with, say, one of the cloud platforms that Goran shared earlier, if you were working with AWS or Google Cloud or any of today's popular cloud platforms, you would be using their command line interface to script and build automation. We're going to be using Brightside's command line interface today to actually interact with a lot of services on the mainframe. Now, I'm a developer. I have some source code on the mainframe, and in today's case, I actually have the source code on a source control management product on the mainframe from CA called Endeavor. It could be in other SCMs as well, but for the purpose of the demo, we're going to be working with source code that's on Endeavor. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to download the source code from the SCM on the mainframe. I'm going to make a couple of changes to the code. Then I'm going to push it back to the mainframe, perform a build, then I'll take my build artifacts and I'll deploy it into a location, a known location from where I can test it. So then I'll proceed then and actually perform a very small test. And if everything works well, I'm nice and solid. And I'll do that to start with by just issuing some commands from my simple terminal here. So I'm on a Mac and I've just got the built-in bash terminal open. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab the source code. But before I do that, what I'll do here is issue this simple CLI command. All my primary commands start with the primary command bright, and in this case, I want to interact with a group called Endeavor. The action I want to take is list, and the object that action operates on is ELE, in this case shortened for elements. What I want to see is a list of elements that are on my environment in Endeavor. So I just issued that command that came back with a list of elements here. I am particularly interested in making a change to this COBOL sample program here. So I have another command that it's another command line command that I can issue to just download that piece of source code. So I'll issue that command here. That's going to go ahead and make an API call into the Endeavor APIs that are running on the mainframe, and it downloaded the source code. So you can see here that the result of that command was written to samp.cbl because that's what I specified as my target file. So let's go ahead and actually open that file up. And I like using Visual Studio Code to do some of these edits. You could use any editor that you'd like. It doesn't really matter. So I can issue a command line command here, code space samp.cbl. Hit enter. That's going to open up Visual Studio Code for me. And here we go. So here's the COBOL code that I just grabbed from Endeavor on the mainframe. And let's make an edit here. Let's say we did it again, but we did it again from DevOps webinar. And I didn't have my insert key on, so I got to delete the spaces here. And I just did Control S to save it. And I'm going to go back here and I do the obvious thing. So now I want to push it back to the mainframe. So here's another command that I've got. This is going to update the element by uploading the contents from my local file to the SCM on the mainframe Endeavor. So let's paste that command in. So this is a Bright Endeavor update element command. I want to update the element called COBOL SAMP. And the source file here is samp.cbl that I had on my machine that I had just made changes to. So that worked. We got a report back from Endeavor saying the insert worked into that element. Now, the next thing to do is I want to actually perform a build on the mainframe. So I'll go ahead and I'll go back to my script here. I've got another command that performs a generate action on Endeavor. If you're not aware with Endeavor, generates are a way to actually perform executions of a procedure that performs a build. It could do various things. In this case, we're performing a build on the mainframe. And there we go. So we generated the COBOL program itself. That finished with a return code of all zeros. So all is well with my change. I'm glad I didn't mess up just the comment change there. And then the next command is another generate, and this time it's on a different type of element. It's on the link element for the same COBOL program. So that's something you would typically do on the mainframe is you would build your COBOL source code first, and then you would perform a link action. So that's just what this command is doing, is it's generating the element COBOL SAMP of type LNK on the mainframe. And there we go. So that one completed as well. Now I've got my build artifacts that were produced by Endeavor on the mainframe as part of this build. The next thing I want to do is make a copy of those build artifacts into my deployment location from where I almost always test from that location. So I'm going to issue another Brightside command. You'll see here that this command is actually operating on something called FMP. So that's my File Master Plus group within Brightside, which lets me copy datasets. And in this case, here's my source dataset, here's my target dataset, and I'm saying copy just as one member from this source dataset to this target dataset, and I'm going to hit enter there. That's going to go ahead and actually perform the copy for me. And again, these are just asynchronous API calls that are happening to the mainframe. There is no persistent connection between my machine and the mainframe. It's just all done on demand. So the copy completed. I've got it. I got it on verbose mode, so it didn't let us know. But the copy just completed there. And the next thing I want to do is test my changes. So in this case, this is just a batch COBOL program. So I can just run a batch, a job on the mainframe from, again, the command line to test my changes out. Now, before I do that, though, let me quickly go here and show you guys. I'm on Visual Studio Code here. Let me show you what that JCL does. So my dataset name here is also 01mim.pds.cntl. That's going to bring it up for me here. And if I click on COBOL Run, all it's doing is it's very simple. It's just typical JCL, and then I've got just one step where I'm executing the program COBOL SAMP, that sample program that you guys saw here. So this is just what it's going to run in the job. So let's go back here, and I will copy paste my command here from my handy dandy script. And what it's doing is it's submitting a batch job that exists in a data set in a member called COBOL Run. So let's hit enter there. That's gonna go ahead and actually submit the job for me. You see the details here. It's in input status, so let's wait to see if it got into the actual output status. So I'll say Bright Jobs list SFBJ, and I'll give it the job ID 05255.
There was a typo on
BLIST.
Thank you.
Yep.
And that's going to go ahead and tell me that all my spool IDs are now ready. So, I'm aware of this job. I know that the output shows up in sysout. So I'm going to go ahead and just tell Brightside to give me the output from spool ID 103. So I'll say Bright Jobs view SFBI, and then give it the job name again, or job ID, and the spool ID number 103, which is a little bit odd, but that's the one we were interested in. Okay, so there we go. So that's the output from the COBOL program that we just updated. It says we did it again from our DevOps webinar. Now, that was me performing these actions through these manual commands on a CLI. Now, that's not all that user-friendly, right? Sure, I can open up these terminals and I can issue these commands to do those things. But the beauty of the CLI that most of you are probably aware of is I can take these same commands and I can put them into some simple scripts. I just chose to use some shell scripts. So what I'll do is I'll go through something similar again, but here's a shell script, a very simple pull.shell script, where all it's doing is it's going to list my elements, and then it's going to retrieve the element from Endeavor for me. So instead of issuing that command, this time I'm just going to run that shell script. So I'll say /pull.shell, and that's going to go ahead and do the same things for me. So it's going to list my elements, and it's gonna go ahead and download the element from Endeavor to my laptop here. So we got it in samp.jcl again. So I'll open up samp.jcl or CBL. We've got it open here. So let's make a quick change. Let's add number 2 to that. And then I've got another script here called push.shell. So this one's going to push the element to the mainframe on Endeavor, and then it's going to also go ahead and do the generates for us. So it'll perform the build as well, and in addition to just pushing the source code to the mainframe. So let's run the push.shell script. So again, that's communicating with Endeavor on the mainframe. It went ahead and updated the element on Endeavor. It's going to now perform the builds by generating the elements. So it generated the COBOL program, got zeros. Next, it's going to go ahead and generate the link element, and hopefully we'll get a 0 with that as well soon. And there we go. Okay, so that worked. And then now, instead of issuing more commands, I'm going to run just a simple shell script again called deploy.shell. It's performing the copy for me, just a Brightside command embedded into the shell script. So I'll run /deploy.shell. And that's going to go ahead and perform the copy for me. And again, just to repeat, that's using the FileMaster Plus APIs on the mainframe to perform that action. And then finally, I've got it deployed. So I'm going to go ahead and submit the batch job. But this time I've got a little bit more logic here. So I'm going to submit the batch job. Then I'm gonna poll for that job to complete and go into a status of output, because that would mean that the job has ended and all the spool content is finalized for me to look at. So once it goes into status of output, which we'll check every 5 seconds, we'll then go ahead and look at the output and save each spool ID locally on my machine, because I want to actually save those results for my own personal use rather than leaving it on the mainframe. So let's go ahead and run that shell script again. Is parse underscore job dot sh. So that'll, at first, it'll submit the job, and now it's checking to see if the status of the job is in output. So we didn't have to wait long. The mainframe seems to be running very quickly today because I've had to wait longer in the past. So it went into output status. It's telling us what the result of the job was. It completed with the condition code of 0. The status is an output. So now it's going ahead and it's downloading all the output for me to a spool DD, from a spool DD to a local file here. So let's open up job, spool. I want to look at 103 because that's the one that we changed again. So let's see what the results are. There we go. So we did it again from DevOps webinar, and this time it says number 2. So that's so what I was trying to describe there is how easy it is to go from issuing these commands manually as a user to taking those same commands and putting them into these simple shell scripts to make your everyday life easier. When you're just doing things that are repetitive, you can use your scripting language of choice on your client machine to build these handy dandy scripts that make your life a whole lot easier. I chose to write them in a shell script fashion. You can write them in Python, any scripting language of your choice that's able to consume CLI commands easily. Now, the next step is, I've actually moved around in development where I did a lot of ZOS development, wrote things in high-level assembler, C, and then I also did development on the web development side where it was more Java, JavaScript, Spring, that sort of thing. One of the things I noticed was going back and forth when I was doing more web development, the culture of developers and agile teams there was a little bit different, where they always started off thinking in a DevOps fashion. And even before they wrote a single line of product code, a lot of times they had a somewhat of an automated build system built into something like Jenkins. And what happens is, as people build automation in this fashion that helps their own jobs, those simple scripts that people build to make their development easier and more automated, those same scripts end up seeding kind of greater orchestration and automation that might serve the entire team. And at some point with continuous delivery, it might even serve the entire organization and company. Now, that's the sort of culture that I didn't really see much of when I was doing more mainframe development. Was people were sometimes building automation for their own sake, but it never really reached a level where that automation was placed into an orchestrator like Jenkins and it served everybody on the team or maybe the entire company. I didn't see much of that going on. Now, what we can do with scripts like this, and I'm sure a lot of you see where I'm going with this, is I can take these scripts and I can actually run them from Jenkins and essentially build automation for my entire team or for my organization. Now, let's switch focus and look at this pipeline again. I know I skimmed through it initially, but this is a pipeline, very simple one in Jenkins, where it's triggered by me making a change to a script that I have on GitHub. Now, as Goran mentioned, there are other products from CA that actually help you with triggering pipelines like this with events from the mainframe as well. But for simplicity's sake, I just have a master branch in a GitHub platform, and making a change to a script in that GitHub branch is going to trigger this pipeline for me. I already have the GitHub project locally on my machine here. Here's the shell script that I've got set up to run in this second step in the pipeline called shell script. It's going to go ahead and run that script for me. Now that script, as I mentioned, is on GitHub. So what I'm gonna do is I have this staged here, but I essentially, the things that you saw me do a little bit earlier in those separate scripts, I have them all here in a script here. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna copy everything from here, and I'll put it into a shell script here, but I'm not gonna push it yet. What I'm gonna do again is I'll go ahead and do a pull. It's going to download my element again. So it just listed the elements, and I'm going to it's going to go ahead and download the elements this time. And I'm going to make a code change there. So I'll say code samp.jcl or cbl again. And this time we're going to change this and say from Jenkins. And let's save that and let's push it back. Because this is a typical scenario, right? A developer is just making changes and they're pushing code back onto the mainframe. So I'll go ahead and push it, so that'll make the changes, and it'll actually also do the generates on the mainframe. But what we'll do right after this completes is I've got my script here that's it's gonna run from Jenkins. You'll see here it's for doing the same things. It's building the code. It's deploying the code using the file master command to my target location. Then it's going to go ahead and submit a batch job to run some tests. And it's going to, instead of saving the files locally on the Jenkins machine, it's actually just going to write it to the screen. So we'll be able to see it easily. Let's see if this is completed. So it's almost there. So it completed the generate. Yeah, there we go. So our change is now up on Endeavor. And let's go ahead and push this to the GitHub repo. So I'll do a git commit -a-m, and I'll give it a message of DevOps webinar and hit enter. Then I'll do oops, I didn't save it. So I have to save this first. And then I'll go ahead and commit this again. There we go. There's the change. And then I'm going to do a git push. Now we should see that this triggers a pipeline run here. So let me click back here. There we go. So that triggered one of my pipeline runs in just my Jenkins playground here. I'll click enter. That's going to go ahead and start. Let's refresh the page. So you'll see here it says it's Docker containers offline. We do have Brightside installed inside a Docker image, and that's actually what Jenkins is going to run. Just an instance of that Docker image that has Brightside already pre-installed. Mike Bauer is going to go into a little bit more detail on how we actually have the Jenkins configuration set up. And that'll give you more background on how this is working. But so there we go. So the pipeline started, the Docker instance started, and it's running the first shell script here where it's just setting up my profile. So it essentially allows Brightside to communicate to the mainframe using securely stored credentials when making the API calls. So that's just part of the staging step. And here's where it's actually running the script that we just changed. So you can see here that it generated the element on Endeavor. So the COBOL program finished with zeros. Now it's going to go ahead and do the LNK. Let me, sometimes I don't have to refresh, but there we go. So the LNK build was also completed with a 0. Now, what's going to do next? It's going to go ahead and deploy it to our target location using the FileMaster plus command. Again, from the script. That completed, and now it's went ahead and it submitted the batch job to perform our test. So the batch job this time is still in input mode. So it's polling, it's checking every 5 seconds to see if the job has completed and gone into output status. As you can see, it's taking a little bit longer this time to complete than the first time that I ran manually from my machine. But there we go. So the job has now reached output status. It's completed. The return code was zeros, and it's actually outputting the results for us from what happened in that job. So it's here's the just the JCL information on the details of the job, and our final sysout is actually written out to screen here, and it says we did it again, and this time from Jenkins. So again, just to reiterate, it's very natural and organic way of starting and building DevOps for the mainframe, where your team's culture itself can change, where they automate more things using their scripting language of choice, powerful scripting languages, and then those scripts can help with seeding this type of team level, organization level, automated orchestration of continuous integration and continuous delivery pipelines. This was very simple, just for the sake of the demo. We actually have examples built out where we've built 100% automated pipelines using Brightside within scripts for some fairly complex mainframe applications that rely on things like MQ and CICS and WAS Liberty and then DB2 for the database. And there are plenty of examples out there on building complicated pipelines like that. But for education's sake, I'm gonna actually turn it over to Mike Bauer, and then he's gonna walk us through a little bit of how we set up this Jenkins environment to easily work with Brightside. So over to you, Mike.
Thanks, CJ.
And I'm switching you to presenter. You should get a pop-up.
Yep, I got it now. Can you see my screen, CJ?
Yes, I
I'm
think
not
we. I can. This is Gaurav. I think I see the agenda slide.
See the agenda slide?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So as CJ mentioned, he walked through making a code change and kicking off the Jenkins pipeline. What I want to focus on is from a DevOps engineering perspective, how was that configured, right? How did we create that pipeline and make use of Brightside to interact with the mainframe? Because what we have seen so far is we had a script that made use of Brightside commands to interact with the mainframe, but how does that tie in to Jenkins as a whole? So we'll go through this agenda. First, we'll talk about the Jenkins file, then we'll talk about how we're running this in Docker, how credentials are managed, and then talk about some future direction we have to make this process even more seamless and improve using Brightside in this environment. So first off, let's talk about the Jenkins file. So the pipeline that Sujay showed, it had two steps, right? It had set up profile credentials and run Brightside demo. The definition for this Jenkins pipeline is typically written in a text file called a Jenkins file, and that's in turn checked into a project source control repository so that when Jenkins goes out and scans the repository or gets triggered, it knows how to run the pipeline. So let me pull that over. So again, here we're in the Blue Ocean plugin view of Jenkins, and we see here general source control management. We're cloning this repository. So let's go to this repository and look at the Jenkins file. So this controls what's going on in the pipeline. So here we see a step which says the agent to run the pipeline in, CA Brightside agent, and this is actually telling it to run in a specific Docker, use a specific Docker template, and I'll show that later in the demonstration. Then we see these various stages, right? So we see set up profile credentials.
Mike, could you make your screen bigger?
Sure.
Thank you.
So we see this set up profile credentials. That is what is communicating to Jenkins to do this step. We also see a stage below for run Brightside demo. So I saw one question come up in the queue with how is Jenkins, working with Brightside to interact with the mainframe, right? So we see this script that we're invoking here as part of this Jenkins file. So it's set up credentials. And I'll also note here we're storing in credentials this credentials called Sujay's Playground, which I'll talk about later again when I'm talking about credential management. So let's go and look at this script. So if we go up a level and we go to set up credentials, we can see here we're running in a Docker image where Brightside is already installed, so we can issue Brightside commands directly. So here we're creating profiles to interact with various mainframe systems. Profiles is a concept that Brightside uses to interact with these systems. So this sort of summarizes the purpose of the Jenkins file and how we are building this pipeline out. Now next I want to talk about the Docker configuration. How was I able to set up an Docker to work with Jenkins? Let me pull this over. So I got to this screen by going to Jenkins, Manage Jenkins, and selecting the configuration. So if I scroll down here, I actually have a plugin for Docker. That plugin is called Docker, and it integrates Jenkins with Docker. So I have a Docker host, and on that host, I'm making use of a Docker template. So we see here in this configuration, we have multiple Docker agents. So one, for example, is CA Jenkins agent, and it's just using a path here so we can assume it's coming from Docker Hub. So Docker Hub is a place where you have different images available that you can pull down into your Docker container to build that image. For this demonstration, we noticed that the name of the agent we were using in our Jenkins file was CA Brightside agent. So here we specify a specific registry of images to pull down from. So this is not on Docker Hub, and it's internal to our site here. So really the effort involved here is if we provide the Docker images on Docker Hub, you would just need to specify the path to that Docker image you would like to use and configure your system to have Docker installed. So for example, Docker is set up here. Now the next piece I want to talk about is credential management. We notice in the scripts where we were creating the profile, we were accessing credentials. So where are those credentials stored? We come back here and we go to our pipeline. We select credentials. We had this credentials for Sujay's Playground. If we click that, we could update it if we wanted. And we see there's an ID associated with this, Sujay's Playground. And you could create, whatever you want in here. It's not limited to usernames and passwords. Whatever secrets you want in here, you can store in here. And then the Jenkins file that I showed earlier is accessing that. Let me pull that back up. Is accessing that through this means. So credentials, Sujay's Playground. And then specifically the username and password were accessed by the script we were calling and set up credentials. And we see that here. Now, another thing is if we wanted to see the content that Sujay updated here, go to demo content shell script, and this is where he updated the code. So this was just being called again from the Jenkins file, which is controlling the definition of the pipeline. So we can see that here, demo script, demo content shell. So I want to leave some time to have questions drive the conversation, but briefly, I just would like to speak a little bit about future direction. So one thing you'll notice is we have the concept of profiles in Brightside, which is how we interact with various mainframe systems. Those credentials are securely stored on the underlying system's secure credential vault. So if it's Windows, it's secure credential vault. If it's running on Mac, for example, it's the system's keychain. But in this specific environment, Jenkins offers us a secure credential store. So we're looking to have command line precedence. In other words, you'll be able to fully qualify a command on the command line rather than having to create profiles. And once that exists, you only need to store your credentials will then only be stored in a single place, which is more secure. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Goran.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Hi, Goran.
Hi. You can see my smiling face. All right. So thank you very much, Sujay and Mike. It was very, very interesting to see how you have implemented the pipeline and executed tasks on Mainframe. I hope that our audience appreciated that. And you know, it's a step towards working with Mainframe as with any other platform, which was the big thing that we wanted to show. All right, so I just have one summary slide of what we went through. And so we showed you a fully functional basic pipeline using Jenkins and shell scripts that executed tasks on the Mainframe side, return data.
I don't know if you're sharing something. We can't see
Goran, I don't know if you're sharing your screen. I'm sorry.
Oh. Apologies.
Now we have it.
All right, thank you so much. I was clicking the wrong button, but this is just a summary of what we just showed you. And like I mentioned, the big story here is that we worked with our code and tests and environments on the Mainframe side the same way we would work with any other platform. And as Sujay mentioned, all the script logic, even test data that we pushed, they remained on the open system side, so on your laptop. And so you can modify it and do another run and sort of iterate very quickly. And we use Jenkins to kind of take over that automation once it's robust enough. And certainly another thing I want to highlight in what you showed, Sujay, was that it's much easier to do logic around these scripts to make them robust, so that once automation executes, you don't have to sit next to it and actually watch over it as it happens. You can create reliable, powerful logic that will save you time. Bottom line, we wanted to also show you how to do it, not just talk about how it would be done theoretically. Hope you appreciate that. We're very interested in learning from you and hearing your questions. So I would, with this, I'd like to kind of take it over to you and open the mic. I don't know if you're going to open the mic or you need to type the questions in the chat window. Alan, how can people ask
if
questions?
they could chat questions in the chat window is the way to do it, Goran. We actually already have a number of questions in here that I'd like to get started with. We don't have a lot of time. First question is, just to set it straight, what Jenkins plugin is used here, and where is the documentation?
So
Sure,
I think that question came earlier in the presentation. So the plugin that was used for the fancy UI was called Blue Ocean, and the plugin we use to integrate Docker with Jenkins is just called Docker.
Good enough.
But I do
What?
want to reiterate though, for the interactions with the mainframe from Jenkins, there's actually no particular plugin that's needed for that purpose, because all we're doing is executing shell scripts from Jenkins, and there's no specific plugin that's needed to do that. All you need is the ability to run shell scripts from Jenkins, and wherever Jenkins is running, in this case, the Docker image gives you access to Brightside from any scripts that you might run from Jenkins. So it's quite lightweight there.
Yeah, and so it's a command line interface that we use in shell scripts, not plugin and some API integration that's often specific to one or the other vendor. So this is very, very open environment.
Yep. Okay.
So there was also another question, just to skip down the list a little bit, that I wanted to get to. There's a question asking if this is a product from CA and how can I get more details. It is a product from CA. It is also part of a larger community. For more information, you can either Google CA Brightside Community Edition. You can go to ca.com/brightside, and it'll take you to a free trial. You can get your hands on the product and start working with it today. But if you want to learn more about the collaborative effort between the three of us that Goran had alluded to earlier, you can check out zoe.org, and we're pushing to contribute. This is all going to be open source, so you can contribute to it. You can build plugins and to extend this functionality, etc.
So guys, my fear is we have so many questions here, we're never going to get to them. But here's the good news about using the written questions. We have records of this and who asked them. Sujay, Goran, and Mike, if you don't mind, I'm gonna send these all to you. And if you have a moment, perhaps you can either post or write to these folks with it. But
Okay.
Sujay, with so many questions, you have access to them here, right?
Yeah, I can see them on the screen here, but yes, if we could get the questions.
Yeah, we'll get them all to you, but we only have 3 or 4 minutes. What do you think is kind of a meaty question that we can ask for people or answer for people?
Sure. One of the questions that's being asked, theme I see, is what sort of APIs are powering some of these commands in the background? So the answer to that, it's actually a variety of APIs. So for some of the actions that you saw where I was submitting batch jobs or interacting with data sets on the mainframe, that's all powered by a set of APIs on the mainframe provided by IBM called ZOSMF. It's a based part of the operating system. It is not a separately paid for option. And actually with ZOS 2.3 onwards, that's freely available. It gets auto started when ZOS starts. So some of the APIs, some of the commands that you saw rely on those APIs being available. The second set of APIs that we relied on were the Endeavor APIs. So if you're on a specific release of Endeavor and higher, you have access to these Endeavor APIs, and the Brightside command line interface takes advantage of those APIs to provide a variety of Endeavor commands for you. So essentially, anything that you would want to do in Endeavor from an automated pipeline, that should be on offer to you as a command from Brightside. Now, I also see another question here of why would I use the command line versus just using the APIs directly? So I'll make the parallel again here where, AWS, the cloud platform that's quite popular today, they actually made the claim that close to 90% of the interaction with the platform is through their command line interface. And that's because it's so easy to operate a command line interface manually or take it and write simple scripts and automation like this. If you were coding directly to the APIs, it's a little bit more complicated. At that point, you're sort of writing programs and you're essentially a bit more complex rather than just issuing these command line interface commands from a script. So that's the argument there, and is that the user experience of somebody writing this automation is vastly improved if you're coding to a CLI rather than directly to the APIs. And I'm just looking through the questions here. I'm trying to see.
You have 1 minute.
Okay. So another question is, how does the command line interface actually connect to the mainframe? So we didn't go into depths here, but Mike Bauer talked about the profile concept in Brightside. For all of these different functionalities in Brightside groups, whether it's Endeavor, whether it's ZOSMF, whether it's File Master Plus that you also saw, we can create profiles in Endeavor that in Brightside that store your host, your port number, as well as your credentials securely. And it's then used in every command that's issued where it will need to provide that information to the underlying API. So quite simple.
Great. Guys, I'm going to need to cut us off. Yeah, we're at the top of the hour. I'm sorry. We will get you these questions, though, Sujay, go around Mike, and if you can get folks some answers, great. But for now, this is Alan Schimmel, DevOps.com. You know what, Zoe, CA Brightside, I think it was a great webinar. I'm sure it's got a lot of people buzzing and thinking. You'll see a lot more on Zoe and CA Brightside. We're creating a whole DevOps for Mainframe section on DevOps.com, so make sure to check that out. Anyway, thanks so much, panel. Guys, what a great job. Thank you. Really great, good demos, good content. Thank you for everyone for listening. We'll see you soon on another webinar. This is Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com. Have a great day.